I was looking at actually going to become a paramedic, and I needed to go and get an OFA 3 certification to be able to get into that program to start training as a paramedic. And so I, as you know, thousands and thousands of other people, took my OFA 3 course with St. John. I'd done it a few times before. I signed up again, and it was doing that I struck up a conversation with one of our staff members in Victoria, and she said, "You sound really keen about this. Have you ever thought about volunteering?" I said, "Well, I like volunteering. I like doing things to support the community." "Sure. What do I need to do?" And it was literally, I think when I first started, it was basically show up on Monday at 7:00. Someone will tell you what to do from there. I was definitely nervous the first time I walked in the door. I wasn't sure what to expect and all that. And a couple of people really took me under their wing very quickly, and were pretty friendly and supportive presences for me. And it didn't take very long for me to sort of get hooked, both on learning and developing my skills and being like, oh, this is a really cool, I actually can like show up and practice my skills and learn things and keep myself proficient every week. And then also put those skills to use and actually go and like help real human beings in the community and do something meaningful. You know, there's lots of volunteer opportunities, but you know, everywhere around the world, but this to me feels more meaningful. First assigned role was as the corporal in charge, or not corporal in charge of, but the corporal in the stores and supplies department for Division 176 in Victoria. So I was literally, my first job was to organize a stock room, which was, or not my first job, but my first actual, you know, assigned role. Throughout that, in part or largely due to the gentleman who was the store's officer and who was my mentor through a lot of that, Michael Dussault. Mike is a keen historical enthusiast, would be putting it mildly. And talking to him and learning from him about some of the history of the organization, some of it really surprised me. You know, when he started talking about, we have in Victoria, we used to own our own building in Victoria on Pandora Street, which has an interesting history as well. But when that building was built for St. John in 1969, 68, 67, somewhere in there, one of the stones that was used to lay that building, one of the cornerstones, was one of the actual stones from our original hospital in Jerusalem from the 11th century. And when Mike started talking about like, yeah, well, we have this stone from like 1,000 years ago in Jerusalem, I was like, what do you mean? Explain this to me. And there were, you know, that sort of started off an interest that has been just either a downward or an upward spiral, depending on how you look at it. I think the thing that struck me the most was that, you know, certainly in the eye hospital in Jerusalem, certainly during my time in Malta, so much is the same. So much is the same. They're wearing the same uniforms with the same rank slides and epaulets that I have. They probably don't, but they look like they could come from the same manufacturer and factory. And they mean slightly different things, and the roles are differently delineated. But it's very clearly one organization with one goal. There are names that really stand out for me. Gerard is, you know, since become known as the Blessed Gerard, is one of them. This is a guy who almost 1,000 years ago created a hostel and a safe space. And back in the 11th century, a hostel was a place that provided rest and food and medical care sort of all rolled into one. You can imagine it as like a combination hotel and hospital in one space. But this is a gentleman who was, you know, so committed to his ideals that even when the city of Jerusalem was under the control of non-Christian forces, they were willing to tolerate his presence and allow him to operate because they recognized the good work that he was doing. And that, I think, says a lot, right? That's reading between the lines in history, but that says a lot about how highly regarded the work that he was doing was, right? And here we are 941 years after that, still following the legacy of his work. There's not many people in history that I can think of that leave that kind of legacy. I'm sure not going to. You know, I can only hope. I have no, you know, but that's remarkable. That to have a millennia-long history of your dedication to helping others inspire that kind of movement, I think is pretty incredible. But I think, Jean de la Valette, who was one of the Grand Masters of the Order in the 16th century in Malta, 570 or 560 years after Gerard, de la Valette had an incredible life story as well. He's one of these guys who you read this story and you're like, is this a Hollywood movie plot that I'm reading? Like, it feels like a Hollywood movie plot. He participated in the defense of Rhodes, was with the Order all the way as they moved to Malta. At one point was captured by Ottoman forces and was, by some accounts, kept basically as a galley slave for a period of time, a couple of years, before being rescued by his own forces, rises to the rank of Grand Master of the Order, and then leads the successful defense of Malta in 1565 in the Great Siege, with, depending on whose numbers you want to believe, Hospitaller forces being outnumbered between 3 and 10 to 1 during that, and at the age of 74, personally leading sorties from the gates and participating in combat. I can't wrap my head around that. I mean, I don't want to lead sorties from the gates and participate in combat, and I'm 39. But yeah, de la Valette's name really pops out. He was so influential that the city of Valletta in Malta bears his name to this day. The story of Dorothy Twist, who was one of our members here in British Columbia, has been really remarkable. And Dorothy was a woman who grew up in the United Kingdom in the late 19th and early 20th century. She was initially trained as a school teacher and then became a typist and a stenographer. Came over here before most of her family as a single woman in 1912, the year after the organization was founded here in BC. And Dorothy worked as a typing clerk at a local bank, a teacher who became a typing clerk. When World War I started, Dorothy was someone who came and did her first aid training and her home nursing training with St. John. And at the time, when she did her first initial training with St. John, we weren't sending as many voluntary aid detachment members over as we did later in the war. And so Dorothy was we presume, we don't know this, but we presume Dorothy was so intent on doing her part to help serve the war effort that she shipped herself over to England, we believe by her own means, and signed up to be a volunteer there instead. And she actually did so. She was so intent on going, she didn't even wait for her first aid certificate to arrive after her home nursing course she finished. By the time her certificate arrived, she was already in England. Dorothy went and served for about a year in Bern in Switzerland, very close to the front lines. We have some indication that she was doing hospital work there, some indication she was doing some clerical support work as well. Returned back to Canada for just under a year. Dorothy signed up again to go back for a second tour. And along with two other nurses from the newly formed Victoria Central Nursing Division 34, which is providing convalescent care to returning soldiers, signed up, went through Vancouver, through Toronto, and then deployed overseas. And within about 2 months of going over in 1918 on that tour, Dorothy contracted Spanish flu, and or what we presume was Spanish flu, and then died on September 26th of 1918. And I think to me the story of this humble young woman who, based on what we know about her story beforehand, she's the daughter of a fairly wealthy, well-off industrialist, very civically minded. We know that multiple members of her family were extremely volunteer and service-oriented. We presume that she was as well, but partially because of that. But to go and sign up to do this, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine someone just being like, yeah, I'm gonna quit my nice stable job as a typing clerk and then launch myself across the ocean. That's pretty remarkable. I think it speaks a lot that as to how highly Dorothy's story was regarded. She was buried with full military honors after her death. She was posthumously awarded a British War Medal. And she remains the only woman memorialized in the cenotaph above Coblehill and Duncan. The values that those people conveyed through their actions, I think, do speak very broadly to me. I try to conduct myself in a way that I think that those people would approve of. And I'm probably not always successful. Nobody's perfect. I'm not trying to say that, but I try to channel that inner ethos a little bit, and that certainly is something that I think of. I think a lot of the public and a lot of our members even don't have a great understanding of the history behind St. John Ambulance and the St. John organization. We're one of the oldest charitable organizations on the planet with nearly a millennia of history. I'd like to increase public awareness of where we come from, and I'd like our volunteers and our members to maybe have a better understanding of the legacy that they're continuing today. Because we have people who show up, and they show up because they want to be civic minded and volunteer and do community service, which is great. That's exactly why we want them here. But they might not have a full understanding that they're doing that on the legacy of a guy who was wandering around Jerusalem in 1080. In everything every human alive today does, we're standing on the shoulders of what the people who came before us did. Everything we do today is done in the context of what was done yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before. I think having that context tells us a lot about who we are. We've all signed up, all of us who are St. John volunteers have all signed up to volunteer for this organization because of what the organization does, but the organization does what it does because in part of where it came from, right? And I think that's a very important part of it.